Let's talk about something we all deal with but barely understand: money. You wake up, go to work, grind your 9 to 5, maybe even pull a side hustle, but somehow, it feels like the money you're earning just isn't enough. The bills keep stacking up, groceries cost more every week, and that dream of financial freedom, it's starting to feel like just that, a dream. But here's the real kicker. The game we're all playing, it's rigged. The rules were written long before you and I showed up. And spoiler alert, they weren't written with us in mind. So let me hit you with this. Who controls our money? Because it's not you, it's not me, and it's definitely not that hard-earned paycheck you see every 2 weeks. There's a much bigger, more powerful system at play. Now before you start thinking, oh great, here comes another conspiracy theory, hold up. This isn't about wild speculation, it's about facts. Cold, hard facts. Henry Ford nailed it when he said this, and I quote, "If people understood how the monetary system works, there'd be a revolution by morning." And trust me, after this video you're going to understand exactly what he meant. We're diving into the shocking truth about the global financial system, from how money is created out of thin air, to why inflation is robbing you blind. But this isn't just about doom and gloom. I'm going to show you how understanding this system can actually give you the upper hand. So, whether you're someone who's just trying to figure out how to save a little more, or you're ready to break free from this system altogether, stick around. This is the video you need to see to truly understand why money feels like it's slipping through your fingers, and what you can do about it. Let's get into it. Alright, so let's start with a quick reality check. Where does money even come from? I mean, who actually creates money? Spoiler alert, it's not the government. Why should you care about where money comes from, who creates it, or how the system works? Isn't it enough to just go to work, earn your paycheck, and hope it's enough to pay the bills? Here's the thing, guys. Money isn't just paper or numbers in your bank account. It's the engine that drives your entire life. Think about it. Your food, your home, your kids' education, even the gas in your car, all of it depends on money. It touches everything. Yet, how many of us actually know how it works or where it comes from? Most of us are out here just trying to make ends meet, but we're completely clueless about the system we're playing in. It's like being thrown into a Monopoly game with zero instructions. Except in this version, the bank always wins. Sounds frustrating, right? That's exactly how most people live their financial lives. We're in a system we don't understand, controlled by rules we didn't create, and the worst part? The people who did create those rules are winning the game every single time. That's what the financial system does to the average person. It's designed to make the rich richer and keep the rest of us just barely getting by. And let me hit you with a tough truth. No one's going to teach you this stuff in school. They'll teach you how to solve for X in algebra or write an essay. But when it comes to understanding how money really works, silence. Why? Because if you understood the system, you'd start asking questions. You'd start challenging it. And trust me, the people in charge don't want that. But here's why this matters to you. If you don't know who controls money, you can't see how it controls you. You can't see why prices keep going up, why your paycheck feels smaller every year, or why no matter how hard you work, true financial freedom seems out of reach. So, before we jump into the history and mechanics of money, ask yourself this. Are you okay being a pawn in a game you don't understand? Or do you want to finally learn the rules, take back some control and start leveling the playing field? This isn't just about knowing more, it's about empowerment. Because once you see how the system works, you'll start to see the cracks. And when you see the cracks, you can figure out how to slip through them. That's why understanding where money comes from and who controls it is so crucial. If you don't know how money is made and controlled, you'll never understand why financial inequality is so out of control. Now, I want to hear from you. If this resonates with you and you're starting to see just how crucial it is to know who controls money, drop the word curious in the comments. Why curious? Because asking questions and digging deeper is the first step to truly understanding the system. So, let me know, are you curious to learn more? Type curious and share your thoughts. Moving on, to give you the full picture, I've got to take you way back to where it all started. Now let's rewind a few centuries to where this all began. Picture this. It's 1694, and England is broke from fighting wars. A man named William Paterson comes up with a brilliant, or devious, idea. Hey, why don't we create a central bank that can lend money to the government, with interest? Boom, the Bank of England is born. And guess what? We're still living with the consequences today. Fast forward to the early 20th century in the United States. By then the financial system had grown, but it was chaotic. Banks were failing left and right, and the economy was a roller coaster of booms and busts. So in 1910, a group of the wealthiest bankers and businessmen secretly met at Jekyll Island, Georgia. This wasn't just a casual hangout, it was a highly secretive meeting where they drafted the blueprint for the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States. Let me paint the picture for you. Imagine you and your friends decide to create the rules for a game. But you're the ones who'll benefit the most from those rules. That's exactly what happened at Jekyll Island. These powerful bankers knew the public wouldn't support a central bank outright, so they crafted a plan that made it look like the Federal Reserve was a government institution. Spoiler alert, it's not. In 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed and the Federal Reserve was born. What's wild is that the Federal Reserve isn't fully owned by the government. It's a hybrid system with private banks playing a massive role in its operations. Essentially, the people who should be regulated by the system are part of running it. But why does this matter to you? Because this system gave central banks the power to control the supply of money. They could create money out of thin air, lend it at interest, and influence entire economies. Over time, this model spread worldwide. Today, nearly every country operates under a central banking system, all modeled after the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve. Here's an analogy. Think of the financial system as a water reservoir. The central bank is the valve that controls the flow of water, your money. They decide how much water gets released and at what pressure. But here's the catch. They also charge you for every drop. And the more they control the flow, the more they can influence how much you get and how much it costs you to access it. So when I talk about money being controlled, this is what I mean. These early decisions from the Bank of England to the Federal Reserve created a system where the power to create and manage money isn't in your hands, it's in theirs. And understanding this history is the first step to seeing how the system impacts you every single day. Now let's explore how central banking evolved over the centuries and spread across the globe. Trust me, I'm not wasting your time. This brief history will help you make sense of this video. First, picture the early 20th century. The world is rapidly industrializing and economies are becoming more interconnected. Countries saw the need for a more stable and controlled financial environment. Following the establishment of the Federal Reserve in the United States, many nations began to adopt similar systems. In 1921, the Reserve Bank of Australia was established, modeled after the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve. The primary goal was to bring stability to the Australian economy, which had been plagued by frequent banking crises and economic instability. The Reserve Bank was given the power to issue currency, control monetary policy, and act as a lender of last resort to other banks. Fast forward to the mid-20th century, the world had just witnessed the devastation of two world wars and the Great Depression. The global financial system needed a complete overhaul. This led to the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, where world leaders created a new international monetary system. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank were born out of these discussions, aiming to foster global financial stability and economic cooperation, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. The Bretton Woods system eventually collapsed in 1971 when the United States abandoned the gold standard. This move allowed currencies to float freely against each other, leading to greater volatility in exchange rates. The evolution of central banking didn't just stop at national borders. We now have a more interconnected financial world than ever before. A crisis in one country can quickly spread to others, as seen during the 2008 financial crisis. So why does all this history matter to you? Because the actions of central banks directly affect your everyday life. They influence interest rates on your loans, the value of your savings, and even the prices of goods and services. Alright, now that we've got a little background on how the banking system was set up, let's talk about something that might sound a bit crazy at first: how money is actually created. Stick with me because this is where the system gets real interesting and real troubling. So let's break it down. The first thing you need to know is that money isn't just printed. Sure, you've seen cash at the bank, but 97% of money today is digital. Yep, it's just numbers on a screen. So how does it even get there? It all starts with the central banks, like the Federal Reserve in the US or the European Central Bank in Europe. These central banks have the power to create money out of nothing. Sounds like something from a magician's act, right? But here's how it works. When a central bank wants to inject money into the economy, they don't go around printing cash. Well, not much of it anyway. Instead, they do something called quantitative easing. This is where they create money digitally and lend it out to commercial banks at super low interest rates. Let's say you're a commercial bank. The central bank gives you a loan and you, in turn, lend that money to people and businesses. But here's the catch. You're not lending out money that actually exists yet. You're creating money digitally by making loans. And when you lend that money to people, you charge them interest. It's like the central bank creates the money and the commercial banks get to profit by making people pay for it. So you might be thinking, okay, but where does that leave me? Well, the money you earn, the money you spend, the money you use to pay bills, most of it is created in this way. It's not backed by something tangible like gold or silver, it's backed by debt. And here's why that's a big deal. You see, when money is created out of thin air, it's based on the promise that it will be paid back, plus interest. So what does that mean? It means that money is always tied to debt. The more money is created, the more debt has to be repaid. This creates a perpetual cycle that keeps the economy growing but also keeps the debt piling up. And guess who ends up holding the bag when it all crashes? Yep, you. Now let's talk about the fractional reserve system. This is where things get even more wild. In a fractional reserve system, banks don't need to have all the money they lend out. Let's say you deposit $1,000 into your bank account. The bank doesn't just hold on to your $1,000 like it's some big treasure chest. No, they only need to keep a fraction of it, maybe 10%, and they can lend out the rest. So, if you deposit $1,000, the bank can lend out $900 to someone else. This is how banks create even more money because that $900 is now being spent, and as that money is deposited somewhere else, the process happens again. It's like a snowball effect where the amount of money in circulation grows rapidly, but it's all based on a tiny fraction of actual deposits. But here's the issue. When the system relies so heavily on debt, it becomes unstable. If people can't pay their loans back, or if the economy slows down and banks can't lend as much, that's when you start seeing things like recessions or even bank crashes. But don't worry, the system has a backup plan. They print more money, and that's where inflation comes in. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, this all sounds a little shady, but what does this mean for me? Here's the bottom line. You're working hard, earning money, paying bills, maybe even saving for the future. But the money you earn is constantly being eroded by the very system that created it. That's because when central banks create more money, it dilutes the value of the money you already have. This is inflation, and it's why the cost of living seems to keep going up, even if your paycheck stays the same. You're fighting a battle where the rules are stacked against you. So let's sum it up with an analogy. Imagine you're in a race and you're trying to run as fast as you can. But every time you pick up speed, the track gets longer and longer. No matter how fast you run, you're always a few steps behind because the game keeps changing. That's what's happening with money. The system constantly adds more debt, creates more money, and the value of what you earn doesn't keep pace. So to put it simply, the money you're earning isn't really yours. It's just a piece of paper or a string of numbers created by a system that depends on debt, and every time that system prints more money, it makes the money in your pocket worth less. That's how money is created today. And it's not as much about making you richer, it's about making the system richer. But now that you see how the game is played, let's talk about the consequences. The fact is the money we use isn't really real money, it's mostly debt. And this debt-based system has a ripple effect that touches every part of our lives, often without us even realizing it. Here's how it works. Central banks, like the Federal Reserve in the United States or the Reserve Bank in Australia, are in charge of managing inflation, and they do this by controlling the supply of money. When the economy needs a boost, they print more money. But printing money doesn't create real value. It just means there's more money floating around, chasing the same amount of goods and services. Result? Prices go up. Inflation erodes the purchasing power of your money. That $100 you could spend on groceries last year might only get you $60 worth of groceries this year. And if inflation is running high, your money gets even weaker. Think about this. In the early 20th century, you could buy a car for around $500. Today, that same car might cost $30,000. That's not because cars have become significantly better, but because inflation has gradually made money worth less over time. So when money is created out of debt, it leads to inflation. And the kicker is, inflation disproportionately affects you and me. While the wealthy can often hedge against inflation through investments in stocks, real estate, or commodities, the average person sees their income and savings lose value, even as the cost of living rises. Here's another hard truth. Debt is money. No, seriously, modern economies depend on debt to function. When you take out a loan, whether it's for a car, a house, or even just a credit card, you're literally creating money. Let's take a look at how this works. When a central bank lends money to commercial banks, the commercial banks then lend that money to businesses and consumers. These loans are paid back with interest, and this cycle of borrowing and lending is what keeps the money flowing in the economy. Now, it might sound like this system could work fine, but here's the problem. Debt must always grow in a debt-based system. For the system to stay balanced, someone always has to be borrowing more and more. But here's where things get tricky. Eventually the system starts to collapse under its own weight. Why? Because not everyone can keep taking on debt forever. People run out of collateral, businesses face downturns, and governments can't keep borrowing indefinitely. This is what we call a debt bubble, and when that bubble bursts, it causes economic crashes like the one we saw in 2008. The 2008 financial crisis was the result of too many loans being given out to people who couldn't pay them back, like subprime mortgages. And when the borrowers couldn't repay, it triggered a massive collapse. People lost their homes, their jobs, and their savings, all because the financial system relied on perpetual debt to stay afloat. So, debt isn't just a personal problem. It's a structural issue with the global economy. The more debt people have to take on, the more fragile the entire system becomes. The whole economy is basically built on a house of cards, and when one card falls, it can bring the whole thing crashing down. What does this mean for you, the average person trying to make ends meet? Well, it's pretty simple. You're stuck in the system. Whether you're borrowing money for school, buying a house, or using credit cards to cover expenses, you're participating in a system that encourages you to take on debt. But here's the catch. The system is designed to make sure you can never fully escape it. The more money you owe, the more interest you pay, and the more you're forced to work just to keep up. The system keeps you in debt, and as debt grows, the gap between the rich and the poor widens. It's like a hamster wheel. The harder you work, the more money you earn, but the more you spend, and the more debt you take on, the less you have. You might feel like you're working harder than ever, but it often seems like the gap between where you are and where you want to be just keeps getting bigger. This debt-based system doesn't just affect individuals, it affects whole nations too. Countries borrow money to fund their spending, sound familiar? And that debt piles up. Just like with personal debt, when countries can't pay back their loans, it leads to economic instability, currency devaluation, and even default. And when countries get into trouble, the average person is left holding the bag. You see it in higher taxes, rising living costs, and a greater burden on public services. Meanwhile, those at the top, the people who are benefiting from the money system, continue to get richer, while the rest of us are stuck dealing with the fallout. The debt-based financial system is a double-edged sword. It creates money and fuels economic growth in the short term, but it also leads to inflation, growing debt, and economic crashes. It's a system that rewards those who can borrow and invest, while leaving the rest of us to pay the price. Now let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. How does this debt-based monetary system affect the world on a global scale? After World War II, the global financial system was reshaped with the Bretton Woods Agreement. The US dollar was made the world's reserve currency, and it was backed by gold. This meant that countries around the world could exchange their currency for US dollars, and the US government could trade those dollars for gold at a fixed price. It created a system where the US dollar was the anchor of global trade and finance. But this didn't last forever. In 1971, the US abandoned the gold standard, and the dollar was no longer backed by any tangible asset. This is when fiat currency came into play, money that isn't backed by physical commodities but instead by the trust in the government that issues it. And with that move, the entire global financial system shifted to a system where money is essentially just paper or digital numbers, with nothing to back it up except confidence in the economy. Now the US dollar is still the world's dominant currency, and this gives the US a unique advantage. When other countries want to trade or store value, they often hold US dollars as their reserve. This means that the US can print more money, and other countries will still buy it, keeping the dollar in high demand. So, when the US increases its money supply, it has far-reaching consequences not just at home but globally. But here's where it gets tricky. When the US prints more money to cover its debts, it affects everyone. Other countries that rely on the dollar are now exposed to inflation risks from that excess money being pumped into the global economy. And while the US benefits from this system, other countries can end up feeling the negative effects such as rising inflation and the devaluation of their own currencies. Think about it this way. The US printing money is like throwing a pebble into a pond. The ripples spread out, affecting everyone else. When the US prints a ton of money, other countries might experience inflation and their own economies could get destabilized. But because the US dollar is tied to global trade, many countries still have no choice but to deal with it. For instance, when the US government prints more money, it often leads to a weaker dollar. This weakens the purchasing power of people in countries where the dollar isn't the primary currency, causing prices to rise across the globe. Countries that hold US debt may also find themselves facing a reduced ability to repay that debt when their own currencies lose value against the dollar. In short, the US dollar's role as the world's reserve currency gives the US a huge amount of power, but it also creates global instability whenever the dollar's value fluctuates. The entire world is interconnected in this debt-based system, and one country's financial decisions can impact millions of people across the globe. Alright, now we're diving into something that's crucial to understand if you're ever going to break free from this financial system, the illusion of wealth. And no, I'm not talking about people wearing flashy clothes or driving fancy cars, though those are part of it. I'm talking about the way the entire system is rigged to make us feel rich when, in reality, we're living in an illusion. One of the key ways this illusion is created is through the control that central banks have over interest rates. Interest rates might sound boring, but trust me, they play a huge role in shaping how we view wealth. See, central banks like the Federal Reserve in the US have the power to set the interest rates that affect everything from the cost of borrowing money to the rates at which banks lend to each other and to you. When interest rates are low, borrowing becomes cheap, but when interest rates are high, borrowing becomes expensive. In the 2000s, for example, interest rates were low, and banks were handing out mortgages like candy. People were able to borrow huge amounts of money with low monthly payments, which made them feel like they were financially secure or even wealthy. But here's the catch. This artificially inflated the value of homes and created an economic bubble, because people weren't really building real wealth. They were borrowing money to buy things, not using their own savings. Let me give you a concrete example, the housing bubble of the mid-2000s. During this period, mortgage rates were at historic lows, so everyone rushed to buy homes. Whether people could afford it or not, the system was pushing them into buying houses. The result? A massive increase in housing prices, even though the underlying value of the homes didn't necessarily increase. The illusion was in full effect. People felt rich because their homes were worth more on paper. But the truth was, they were sitting on debt. But when the housing market crashed in 2008, it wiped out those illusory gains, leaving many homeowners underwater, owing more on their mortgages than their homes were worth. That crash didn't just affect homebuyers, it had ripple effects throughout the economy, leading to job losses, bankruptcies, and a global financial crisis. This whole cycle of boom and bust is not random, it's actually orchestrated by central banks. The manipulation of interest rates creates these cycles of economic growth followed by collapse. When central banks lower interest rates, it encourages borrowing, spending, and investing, leading to an economic boom. But eventually the debt becomes unsustainable and the bubble bursts, leading to an economic crash. Now you might be wondering, okay, but what does this have to do with me? Here's the thing, central banks aren't just playing with numbers, they're playing with real people's lives. The boom times are great for those who get in early, but when the bust comes, it's the average person who suffers the most. They lose their homes, their jobs, their savings, all because of this constant cycle that central banks control. So, what does this mean for you? If you're living in this system, the wealth you think you're building, whether it's in the form of a home, stocks, or retirement savings, might not be as real as you think. Sure, you might have equity in your home or see your superannuation going up, but those things are tied to a system that's completely dependent on borrowing and debt. As long as the economy is manipulated by interest rates and money printing, that wealth can disappear as quickly as it appeared. But don't feel bad, you're not alone. The whole system is designed to make us think we're doing better than we really are. It's why people are often caught up in keeping up appearances, chasing the illusion of wealth without understanding the deeper economic forces at play. To really understand wealth, you need to realize that true wealth isn't about what you have on paper or what the system tells you is valuable. True wealth is about owning real assets that are not subject to manipulation and about building financial stability that doesn't rely on debt. If you can break free from this illusion, you can start building real, lasting wealth that isn't subject to the whims of central banks. In the end, the illusion of wealth is one of the biggest traps of the financial system. It keeps us chasing more, borrowing more, and feeling like we're getting ahead, even when we're not. By understanding how the system works and how it manipulates us, you can start to see through the illusion and make decisions that set you up for real financial freedom. First off, you need to realize that this system is not designed with your best interests at heart. The financial institutions, the central banks, and even the government, they all benefit when people remain in debt, constantly chasing money, and living paycheck to paycheck. The more people rely on debt and credit, the more money flows into the hands of these financial institutions. This keeps the whole system running. It's not about helping you build wealth. It's about keeping you in the cycle of debt, consumption, and dependence. If you're stuck in this cycle, it feels like you're always working hard but never truly getting ahead. The truth is, the more money you make, the more they make off of you through interest rates, taxes, and inflation. And when you're stuck paying off loans or maxing out credit cards just to stay afloat, it's hard to break free and start building real wealth. The deck is stacked against you, and without the right knowledge, it's easy to keep playing and losing. 2. You're being impacted by inflation, even if you don't feel it. If you're not paying attention, you might think you're making the same amount of money, but in reality, it's worth less than it was last year because of inflation. For example, you might remember a time when petrol prices were lower or groceries were cheaper, but due to inflation those same prices are now higher, meaning the money you're earning doesn't stretch as far as it used to. And the real kicker? The government's response to inflation is to print more money. This only makes the situation worse. When they print more money, the value of your dollars drops even further. So not only are prices going up, but your purchasing power is decreasing at the same time. This is why it feels like your paycheck just isn't going as far as it used to. You're making the same amount of money, but it doesn't seem like it's enough to cover your bills or make progress on your savings. The wealth gap is widening, and unless you understand the forces behind it, you'll just be playing catch-up your whole life. 3. The stock market, a mirage of opportunity. Now, let's address another issue that many people fall victim to, the stock market. Don't get me wrong, the stock market can be a great tool for building wealth, but you need to understand that it's not a guaranteed path to riches. The financial system and the stock market are heavily influenced by government policies, corporate interests, and institutional players. The little guy, who's just trying to build wealth, is often at the mercy of these massive forces. If you're putting all your faith in the stock market without understanding the bigger picture, you could be setting yourself up for disappointment. There are moments when stocks soar, but there are also crashes that wipe out people's investments in an instant. And while the wealthy can ride out these storms, the average person doesn't always have the resources to weather the volatility. But here's the good news. You don't have to rely solely on the stock market to build wealth. Understanding the financial system gives you the ability to make smarter, more strategic decisions about your money, investments, and savings. You don't have to play the same game the banks and corporations are playing. You can create your own rules and use your understanding to create opportunities that make sense for you. 4. Take control of your financial future. The most important takeaway here is that you have the power to take control. Understanding how the financial system works gives you the knowledge to break free from the traps that are set for you. Once you see how things really work, you can start making decisions that move you towards financial freedom, instead of staying stuck in the cycle of debt and illusion. This is why education is so crucial. The more you know, the more you can make your money work for you instead of letting the system work against you. There are alternative investments, smart saving strategies, and ways to build assets that are not dependent on the whims of the financial system. By taking small steps today, you can change the direction of your financial future for good. 5. Shift your mindset from consumer to wealth builder. At the core of all of this is a mindset shift. Once you understand the financial system for what it is, you can start thinking like a wealth builder instead of just a consumer. The system is set up to make you think you need to buy the latest things, upgrade your lifestyle, and keep up with trends, but real wealth comes from owning assets, building multiple streams of income, and understanding where your money is going. It's about shifting from a mindset of instant gratification to one of long-term planning. It's about using your knowledge of the system to protect yourself from its traps, while also building real wealth that isn't subject to inflation or market crashes. The more you learn, the more powerful your financial decisions become. The financial system affects every aspect of your life. It influences how much you earn, how much you spend, and how much wealth you can build. If you don't understand how it works, you're left at the mercy of forces beyond your control. But once you understand it, you take the power back. You can start making smarter decisions, build wealth on your terms, and finally break free from the cycle that's been holding you back. This knowledge isn't just about understanding the world, it's about changing your own world for the better. Alright guys, if you're serious about breaking free from the system and truly understanding how to take control of your financial future, don't stop here. Make sure to check out this next video right here. It's packed with practical tips and actionable strategies to help you take that next step toward financial freedom. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. See you there.